As far as I can tell, time travel in the sci-fi sense doesn't really exist, which is a shame because I would love to be able to get one of my great, 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 great grandmothers and grandfathers down to the present to come and look at my life and just get a sense of what their reaction is to the modern world. Because as I talk about a lot in this podcast, the rate of change has increased in the last century and then the last decade and then the last 5 years. And it looks like that's going to increase. And with that comes the risk of losing a sense of perspective, certainly as a collective hive mind of what we're all doing here. Why are we doing it? What do we make changes for? What are we hoping to have, especially when those things are contested anyway? So I thought it would be cool, and I put it to my patrons and they agreed, to look at the invisible trades that we all make, but none of us would choose. And it's a bit sweeping because where I say all and none, I mean most. Because obviously you can find somebody who believes pretty much anything. I think that there's any number of things that a time traveler from 200 years ago would look at today and be shocked that are things that we accept. And they would ask why we think are good. And they're probably just things that we're inured to. And similarly, maybe even people from 20 years ago might come to the present and be shocked that we all collectively accept certain things. So I thought it'd be fun to do a tour of those things today, and hopefully it could spark the conversation in your own mind's eye, and we can meet in the crystal palace of the collective consciousness and grow a more beautiful future. That means, of course, one in which you support me on patreon.com/Andrew. Thank you so much to my patrons supporting this week's episode. And thanks to all of you in the listener community for letting your thoughts be known, whether it's on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, whatever. I love hearing from you and getting to share these ideas. So thanks for your kindness there. Let's go. Bad deals. The invisible trades that all of us have made that none of us would choose. It's a heavy one. It's a heavy one, and I feel the great weight of responsibility to get them all right. But obviously, there's so many that I can't capture in just a single episode. So I want to start off by saying that some of the biggest changes that have occurred in the last century and then even decade surround gender politics and sexual politics and courtship. I'm just going to rule out talking about that from the top because those things warrant their own episode. Plus, I think they're heavily discoursed upon elsewhere, so I don't think you'll be struggling to find opinions or ideas around that stuff. But in the event that you are turning to me for my thoughts on it for whatever reason, I do have another channel in which I put video essays on occasionally called Second Look with Chris Andrea. And on that, I've got an episode in which I explore why young people, and particularly young men, aren't having sex anymore. So you can find that out. I'll link that in the description of this, wherever you're looking. But before I get into some of the ideas that we are going to explore today, I think it's important first to give an idea that things can change a lot and we can really get used to them quite easily. It's pretty phenomenal. It's for sure a great gift of our species that we are so adaptive. But it can be quite striking that something that would have been off limits to everybody in a population merely years ago can quickly become integrated and accepted by all of that population in no time. And then once that decision's been made, it's not questioned anymore. This general capacity leads to a blind spot that's sometimes described as a shifting baseline. It's kind of like that frog in a boiling pot. If you don't know the metaphor, you've got a frog in a pot of cold water, you put the heat on and it gradually gets warmer and warmer. And because it gets warmer by increments, the frog doesn't notice until the point that it's cooked to death. Obviously a bad deal for the frog. But I think it's a funny metaphor to even exist because if you put a frog in a pot and then gradually turn up the heat, when it gets hot, the frog will simply just jump out. Whereas people, our adaptive capacity to things that are potentially not good for us, is potentially limitless given the things that you can see people accepting throughout history. One interesting essay that I read once looked at the shifting baseline effect and described it in terms of surveys of fish in a particular bay in Canada. And how they did it was that they found that a couple hundred years ago, whoever was in charge of surveying the number of fish in this bay, maybe they had 200 million tons of fish. And then that declined because of the fishing. And so the next generation, the surveyor, they start their baseline. Okay, well, they've got 80 million tons of fish here. Then the next generation starts at 50, next generation at 20. And then suddenly the population is completely collapsed, all while being monitored the entire time because the baseline reference point for the people responsible for it kept moving. So even though everybody was trying to not let this happen, it did happen. In the same way, I think that we're all making decisions for how to optimize our life and societies, make sure that we're all wealthy and happy and getting to do the maximum amount of things with our time, being productive and maximizing for whatever our values are, whether they're social, spiritual, financial, intellectual, whatever. And along that journey, decisions that we make that have unintended, vastly negative consequences can be wholly unexamined if they happen slowly. So that's kind of the premise, that shifting baseline for what we're looking at today. It's the things where the rug's been kind of pulled out under us from our collective perspective, where if there was a lever where we could choose in an instance, would we go this way or this way? None of us would choose to go that way, but all of us have ended up that way for whatever reason. So the first bad deal we're going to talk about today, which is one that I think would be immediately obvious to our time traveling ancestor, is that we have kind of deleted the night sky from our lives. Maybe that doesn't sound so important because, what do you need the night sky for when you're sleeping? And what do you need the information for when we have good scientific data? And we can see more of the cosmos than ever in many senses. But at an individual level, the night sky was an important center of spiritual occupation for almost everybody, for almost all of human history. And now most of us, just a quick caveat, I'm going to be Western centric in how I'm looking at all these topics because that's the water that I swim in. But most of us have lost the night sky from our consciousness. And I don't mean we can't go out somewhere and look at it. I mean, most of us, if it's nighttime now, if you duck your head out the window, the sky is much less accessible to you than it was for almost all of your ancestors. And I think the cost of that is one that none of us would have chosen because it's too great. Even though it's obviously a great benefit to have electric light, it's principally because of light pollution that's the case. And other pollution, but mostly light pollution. Light pollution, the density of our developments, and the fact that within our own house we can access electric light. So most of us don't even think of what phase the moon is in, so we can know when it's a good night to go for a walk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, even though there's great benefits to all of the nighttime electrical light-based activities, I think in aggregate we wouldn't choose to switch it off, which is what we've done. Because the night sky is a central point of human societies in storytelling, in passing the seasons, in spiritualities, and the raw majestic wonder of seeing a raw night sky is an insanely high-priced thing to lose. I talked last week about how people queue up to see the Mona Lisa. If the night sky didn't exist at all, and then someone fabricated it in one part of the world and you could go see it, everybody would be going to see it. It's an incredible resource at our disposal, just as much as we wouldn't switch off being able to look at a sunset. But we have inadvertently switched off the night sky. And I think that's one of those lever moments where if the collective had our hands on the lever of what we're doing, we would have chosen to keep it and figured out other ways to do all the other stuff. And in fact, that leads pretty naturally to a broader switch that I don't think we would have made, which is our general divorce from the natural world. So just as much as an ancestor from 200 years ago would be shocked that you couldn't see the stars at nighttime, I think all ancestors that we've had would be shocked that most of us are not within a short walk from clean drinking water, or as a collective that most people that you walk up to on the street won't know what the seasonal movement of the animals in the area are, or even the names of the animals, or notice that there's fewer of them or more of them or whatever it may be. There's just a general divorce from the connection to the natural world that kind of becomes its own feedback loop. As we as a collective are made up of more individuals that have less value in the day-to-day interactions with certain elements of the natural world, it's then easier to trash it more and to become further removed from it, to the point where the efforts that we make to protect elements of the natural world seem odd and abstract or ideological. For example, there's a field I'm thinking of in Canberra in the middle of office blocks. They've kept one block free because it's the breeding ground of a certain moth. I think that it's probably countdown for that field to eventually be knocked down as the virtue of a particular moth in a particular area declines even further. But that's even an example where there is a dialogue. In most instances, there isn't. And the virtue of having new areas for housing, highways, buildings, industrial facilities, or whatever, it's opposed not at the first point from people having a day-to-day engagement with those locations and the movements of the species through there, but more through an abstract and ideological one, which makes it a different type of discourse and a different type of reality to contest. And this divorce isn't something just to lament in some sort of kumbaya, nature has an intrinsic value above everything sense, even though you'd be well within your rights to have that lamentation. In 2010, I visited a friend in Zurich, which is the biggest city in Switzerland. And I was shocked that you could swim in the river that runs right through the middle of the city. I grew up in Melbourne, which has the Yarra running through it. And you probably need to travel 50 kilometers through Melbourne before you can get to the point where it's a good idea to swim in the Yarra. And so it was shocking to me, the idea that a river in a city could be clean enough to swim in. But all of those ancestors that I talked about, every generation of every human up until 100 years ago would be shocked at the idea that you couldn't swim in whatever river it was wherever you lived. You couldn't just go down and have a drink. If I wandered down to the center of Budapest today and drank from the Danube, if I didn't get seriously ill, I'd get some seriously ill-tempered looks. But apart from what I would say is absolutely a non-trivial indulgence of being able to enjoy swimming in a river or running through a meadow or climbing a mountain or whatever the natural features are of wherever it is that you live, being connected to the natural world and feeling the rhythms of its changes and noticing the nature and being able to exploit plant life and animal seasons and whatever, like that's something that you're physiologically built for. It would make sense to me that that would come with painful consequences for people, whether or not they register them. And I'm certain that that is something that would be really obvious to people from centuries ago. And if they all had their hands on the lever of whether or not to swap that for mini marts and convenient air travel, I think they would probably choose to keep the wonder, exactly in the same way as the night sky. If there wasn't any nature anywhere and then somebody invented a park, a Jurassic Park, if you will. No, if somebody invented a park with all the features of the natural world within it, in which you could go and, kind of like the national parks of the US, you can go and you can camp, you can move at the rhythm of nature and observe its comings and goings and marvel at its scale and splendor. There's a reason that that's a valuable thing. And if everybody could have it rather than those who happen to go to particular places with particular resources, I think that that's something that most of us would choose. At least I hope. Another obvious one leading on from that is the sort of collective skill erosion for the core things that we're made to do in life. It's easy to laugh at these because relative to the mean of our society now, it sounds like weirdo fringe ideals and the people that pursue these things hardcore do seem like massive outliers or ideological types or whatever. But the idea that I, a 40-year-old person in 2025, I don't know anything about what it would take to keep myself alive outside of the context in which I'm in. I mean, I could barely do it within the context in which I'm in, but I think that would be something stark to every ancestor starting a century and going backwards for millions of years, because the basics of feeding myself, sheltering myself, dressing myself, navigating anywhere, finding and keeping water. I would be at, if it was a scale of 1 to 100, I would be at 1 on all of those. And that's a disaster. There's that gag you see everywhere about going back in time and, you could explain to people that there are batteries and phones and electricity and all these things, but, can you actually do any of them, or can you tell people how any of them work or how to get to any of them? For most people, the answer is no. But the funny thing is now we've got the resources and information to do all these basics of self-survival, but so few of us, I guess, outside of the scouts or whatever, pursue those, which is odd and maybe worth correcting. In fact, I'm going to go away and sort that out. I would be so much happier if I knew how to find water in the event of a disaster or something like that. It's sad because it shouldn't take a disaster to do these things, because again, there's probably some intrinsic happiness in doing the things that are the very survival things that we're all built for, rather than arguing about Israel online. I wonder how far I would have to walk in any direction from where I am before I stumbled across somebody who is capable of building a permanent shelter on their own from the materials that are around. I mean, I live in an area with a lot of houses, so I guess you just use one of those. But I think my point still stands. I think that's another one where if we all had our hand on the lever 100 years ago, do we choose to pull the switch, and the consequence of whatever choice we make is everybody is going to forget how to find food, water, build shelter, make clothes, whatever. That's a huge consequence, no matter what the benefit is. And we all have collectively unconsciously chosen it. And maybe we would reconsider if given the chance again, at least find some compromise. Continuing on the idea that our bodies and brains have evolved to be in a particular type of natural world, there's a lot about modern living that has divorced us from our own bodies, particularly as we move more of our cognitive realm into cyberspace. There's more dividends to be spent in interacting with reality through interfaces than through the physical realm. And so consequently, the maintenance, care, usage, and growth of our bodies is of far less importance than it used to be. But I'm not sure that that's making life better for people. I'm not sure if it's making us happier, given that our bodies are ultimately, regardless of the specific mappings of our external interfaces, our body is still where we live. That's still where everything happens. The chance to care for that doesn't only exist in the sort of sporadic cultural sense of how we use gyms and or play sports. I mean, I'm at a point now, because I've got 2 young kids, where I'm significantly less fit than I have been in the past, and I really feel it. I didn't grow up in any culture or have any surroundings really where I was advised or instructed on the benefit of taking care of your body too much, and only really discovered the joy of being strong and fit at the low level that I was anyway in my 30s. And I was just shocked. Once I then lost it at some point, I was like, wow, life is twice as good. Sitting down feels like a dream when you're fit and stronger. Just walking around, the world feels twice as alive. And the idea that even at a state of high fitness, I'm probably at a fraction of what I would be if I was using more of my physical faculties every day in a way that required them to grow and scaffold and have skill and expertise. I mean, wow, who knows how rich life would feel? I would for sure take that over many of the modern conveniences that are the things that have replaced it. And I imagine, again, if that was a lever that the collective could pull, maybe it is one that we would consider not switching off, because being connected to our bodies is such a wonderful thing. I couldn't tell you the last time I ran as quickly as I could or did any sort of max exertion. I'm trying to better myself in those ways because my aforementioned children, watching them grow and develop, it's really fun to see that sometimes they'll jump the furthest they've ever jumped. And I wonder what that is for me. And so I try to jump new things or whatever, but it's not quite the same as having it built into your daily life in the way that people would have in the past. And I know it's probably well covered turf, but it's very easy to speculate on how the global pandemics of depression, anxiety, and other psychological distresses wouldn't be an obvious, inevitable end consequence of taking away the physical autonomy and natural environments that were an absolute baseline for most of human civilization until very recently. And I should say this litany of issues is not because I am in any way in despair for all the cool things that we have. I love that I get to do this podcast, for example. I love being able to connect with my friends across the world. I love all the modern conveniences. It's just more by reflecting upon the levers that we would and wouldn't pull, we can make choices in how we reorder our own lives and get just a little gentle prod and reminder of what those shifting baseline things that people have accidentally accepted that we don't necessarily need to accept. Because you, of course, I mean, any number of you will be listening to this and be, yeah, I know, I think I've thought that years ago. That's exactly why I swim in the ocean every day, or that's exactly why I make a point to connect to the night sky, or whatever it is. This isn't like an hour of hate. This is just a nice, gentle reminder of all the cool things that we still have access to, but you have to sort of arm wrestle the mean of culture a little bit to access a bit more. Another one on that I'll talk about, because I just brought up my children, is the nuclear family situation. I don't know what point it happened or how it happened. I'm sure it's different in different societies, but as we've sort of had more wealth and more access to space and been able to be more autonomous and to be able to make the choice to be further from our families and further from other people and have our own house and everything we need is something we could purchase. The splintering off into different nuclear units has been pretty disastrous for a large number of things that are extremely important, not least of which raising kids. I mean, it's very obvious to me day to day for both my wife and I how much easier life would be and how much more fun it would be to raise our kids if we were doing it with all the people that we knew within a short walk and with all of our family. I understand it's a nightmare premise for a lot of people to be really close to your family, but it's something that you would have had to at least reckon with in the past. And for many of us, it's obviously a very important thing as well. The rate at which we all undertake tasks alone in a certain sense that historically nobody would have done alone, or it would have seemed a madness to try, is, I think, something that our visiting ancestors would look at and very strongly make sure that we don't pull the lever on. Because as we've increasingly measured society through numbers incorrectly, I think we've made a lot of decisions incorrectly that make those numbers look good at the expense of a lived experience reality. So say, for example, everybody has way more income and way more money now than they used to. But if you were to crunch all the numbers in the hierarchy of things that are actually valuable to you, maybe seeing your family or having your kids see their grandparents or any of these other number of things would have been more important than, say, and I'm just picking one at random, everyone's house being worth 2 million Australian dollars or something like that. I think maybe we'd go back to 1999 and be like, oh, that's probably not going to be the most important thing in the world. But I'm projecting my personal experience here, but I think that's a relatable one across the realms. If I think of my friends that live in Melbourne or Sydney, they're raising their kids. They can't live anywhere near where their parents live. So they're still an hour drive away. Or if they live around the corner from their parents, they don't live near their friends because they've been split into different social strata by the different amounts of money that they make in their lives. So no one lives near their closest friends from growing up who might be having kids at the same time. And maybe it would be really cool if everybody could hang out and share parenting, share the skills, share the burdens, share the equipment. But all these things that would have been extremely obvious for every generation until now are something you have to really swim against the stream to be able to access it all. And, I've only picked parenting in that, but there's any number of elements in all of your life that you could pick that have been impacted by the increasing distance that we have from each other as more and more of us split into further and further disparate nuclear units in a way that's anachronistic against cultures through history. In fact, I should point out that it's a really interesting phenomenon here where, Hungary had communism for many decades. And so it kind of has a quicker link to some parts of the past in some ways because there was less financial development for a few decades. And every big house here is advertised as being a 2 or 3 generation house because the norm is that people would expect to live with their parents or even also grandparents, which has surprised me because these are houses that are the size of, probably slightly smaller than an average Australian house. But that's just an interesting side note. It's probably an obvious observation to make, but I still feel honor bound to make it, is that the force behind so many of these changes are our evolutionary nature in that we've been built for times of scarcity, but we live in times of abundance. So wherever we get micro choices of, do we want to have less or something or more of it, we often choose more, but the collective aggregate of all of those choosing more is that we end up with less of things that are really important in ways in which we didn't consider. I think one really simple but relatable experience to that is the food that we eat. 60% of all the food that Australians eat is processed. So more of it is not real than real. You would think that being in a sort of tech wonderland with infinite wealth would mean eating more high quality fresh food, but the opposite's been the case. And if you think about a walk through a supermarket, how much of it is directly from a tree or an animal? It seems like a very small minority. Whereas if you picture yourself going down the cereal aisle, like there might only be 1 or 2 things there that are actual grains, but then there's a huge variety of other types of things in the processed realm. And I'm not sure that benefit is actually that great. It's kind of fun to be able to pick from 7 or 8 barely differentiated brands of tomato sauce, but it doesn't seem to be worth it. I mean, even separate to the health or the actual taste considerations, just for the decision fatigue, if there was only one brand of tomato sauce that I could walk past and get, I mean, I don't want to sound like a communist, but that would please me. I would like to walk into a supermarket that was a fifth of the size and had a fifth of the variety. I find it overwhelming and my cognitive capacities collapse in that realm. I'm sure that that's most of us, and I'm even more sure that that's intentionally by design. But it doesn't make for a richer life experience. It just makes for a richer bunch of people that are manufacturing this stuff, passing it off as food and giving us consumption-based diseases that we would easily avoid. So I think that's another one where people in the past will be like, what? Sorry, you think that this is what an orange is meant to taste like? Why do you have to have them every week of the year? Is it better to have tomatoes that taste 20% as good but are available for 100% of the time? I personally would say no. And I think that the ancestor ghost hanging over our shoulders would very strongly not let us pull that lever. Certainly not to the degree that we have. Continuing from the supermarket, because it's something that we can all relate to, it struck me where I lived in Canberra that I had a local set of shops, but because of the economic disasters of Canberra generally, there was nothing actually useful that I could get from the local shops. There was no food or anything. I had 2 options where I could live. I could go for a 30, 40-minute walk, or I could go for a 5-minute drive to buy stuff. And if I only needed something like milk, then I realized the calculation is, oh my God, I'm spending like 2 liters of fuel to get 2 liters of milk in this instance. What system is designed for that? That's madness. But, the economics of oil are incredible. But the aggregate externalities of both oil and milk are extremely witnessable disasters in the scale in which they exist. But even if they weren't, it's just a stupid trade. And very much in the spirit that the medium is the message, if you look at roads and cars and how they've redesigned our lives generally, I think we would strongly reconsider how we've done that. If I was the ghost of Christmas past looking over my shoulder just at a highway, I think I would be asking the question that doesn't seem to come up at any sort of official level, which is, hang on a sec, does everybody need to be driving around 4 empty seats? These people are mostly going from one place to the same place. Like, what are we doing here? Another shifting baseline that I think would surprise people from the past is how big states have grown. This is, I think, just largely as a result of improved technology and the capacity to collect tax. I think it's just been an encroaching thing where you don't have to send around strong men with a box and clubs to get tax out of people now. You can just sort of shoop electronically from everybody. And maybe you'd be surprised to hear that 100 years ago, the amount of tax that the national government took from people would have been probably a third of what it is now. And then 100 years prior to that, it would have been a tenth again. The reach of government is actually much larger than it used to be. It doesn't feel that way because in the past you could think about how concentrated absolute power was in fewer people. But modern states have powers that they could only dream of in the past. And I think that there's a large conversation to be had, and I guess everybody is ongoingly having that conversation about what the right level of government is and in which areas of life. But I think that shifting baseline impact of, well, would you choose in 1900, especially having seen what happens in World War One and then World War Two, and the totalitarian states that span that and its consequences? If you could pull a lever and say, I think that states should be 300% more powerful than they are now, I think many of us would strongly lean no and think, well, people will figure this stuff out for ourselves. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's at least interesting to think about, I hope. Another one that is surely related to everybody wanting things to be as convenient as possible in the individual instance, but not thinking about the meta consequences of that, is how everything breaks now and nobody knows how to fix it. It's kind of really funny that we would be in this situation. If you visit your grandma, maybe she's got a fridge from 1970 that still works. My friend Potsy, he intentionally, when his microwave broke, he made me in Melbourne pick up a microwave and drive it to Canberra that was from 1972 or something, because not only does it still work, which in modern appliances is a miracle, but he knows how to fix it, which is something you can't say for your contemporary stuff. When things break now, you have to replace them. But also, so few of us have the skills, but also so few things are designed to be reparable. In fact, there's an obviously hostile design element to prevent you from being able to do that. It would be very easy to make an iPhone like the old Nokia 3310, where you could pop off the back, chuck in a new battery once the battery's dying or whatever. And it's the same with your laptop screen or whatever. If you smash it, boom, the screen's $5,000 to replace, a new laptop's $2,000. What are you going to choose every single time? No one on the planet is going to choose to replace just the screen, even though that means all the wastage. And it's the same across product after product. That's a lever that I think would only the psychopath coldness of the blind shareholder who benefits without having to see the consequence of that action would choose to pull that lever. And yet we have pulled it on basically every single item that you're going to touch in the next rest of your life. And another one I talk about, because I brought up iPhones there, is phones. I mean, I don't want to go into the specifics because I already risk being an extreme boomer at the rate I talk about it. But if at the point in which I first put a smartphone into my hand, I could go back and use a crowbar and rip that thing and fly it into the ocean, I would. I couldn't not use it now. I just don't feel like I have the fortitude to push against reality and learn all the ways of navigating life without all the absolute real and amazing benefits that a smartphone brings. But I would choose not to have it on aggregate, and for all the cognitive sap and all the replacement of boredom and all sort of other stuff that I really treasure. I treasure it not only in the abstract, but when I experience it, I treasure it. But I can't choose it now. It's not an option to me. I've disempowered myself from it being an option to me. Maybe I should examine that more. But that's absolutely a lever that I think many of us would not have chosen to pull. So, I mean, what do you think? What are the things in your own life that these are resonant experience for? Please tell me, because I'm super curious. I hope this hasn't seemed like a trash fest just because there are so many things that have changed with unintended consequences for the worst. It's absolutely not. It's absolutely not intended to be like that. Instead, to pick a metaphor, I would like this to be like a flaming arrow fired into the sky, so we can suddenly see everything and realize, actually, there are all these realms of human endeavor and things that I value, or things that other people in the past valued, that would be really important to me, and I would like to pursue more. Or good on me for all those things. Good on me. None of this resonates. I already eat seasonally from my own garden through which I exercise, and I live next to everybody that I know and love. And isn't that great? And I've never even seen anything from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. My life is basically complete. If that's you, good for you. For the rest of us, just a nice little nudging reminder that there's so many beautiful things that are part of your birthright as a living being in the world that are harder to access than they have been in the past. So be kind to yourself if you're suffering for not having had them. I think it's a completely normal response, and feel seen and secure if you want to pursue those things against the grain. You're absolutely not alone, and there are collective madnesses in every single time, and it's inevitable with all the quick moving changes that our time would be one of more extreme madnesses than perhaps other eras. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey. We'll continue back next week. I'm going to go to my Patreon patrons with a new set of topics to explore. What a great opportunity for you to sign up now. There's actually a free tier, so you can do it and vote anyway. Just go to patreon.com/Endrey, ENDREY. And if you haven't already, please do like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to. If you enjoy the podcast, send it to a friend. I would love that. I love doing this and would like to do it for a long time. Okay, wherever you are, take care out there. Thanks. Speak to you next week.